Please welcome your host for this evening, Dr. Lindsay Hoffman.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to welcome you all in person or virtually to the 11th Annual National Agenda Speaker Series. Thank you to the University of Delaware's Center for Political Communication, the Office of the Provost, the College of Arts and Sciences, and the Division for Student Life for helping support this program. This year's theme is Reflecting America. How is this historic era of political divides, social movements, economic upheavals, fueled by the pandemic and politics, redefining America? Have we ever faced anything like this before in this country? We're going to explore these questions. We explored them last week or 2 weeks ago with our first speakers, author David Joy and NPR White House correspondent Asma Khalid in our inaugural program. You can view that at cpc.udel.edu. We have a hybrid program this year. Half of our talks will be in person and live streamed, while the other half, tonight included, are entirely virtual. But we will be inviting audience participation. So to submit a question, type your question into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window, and it may be selected during our Q&A at the end of this talk. Tonight, we're featuring 2 speakers from an organization called Respect and Rebellion. It features pairs of speakers with divergent views on a variety of topics. I'm pleased to work with Respect and Rebellion and the Village Square, a quote, nervy bunch of liberals and conservatives who believe that disagreements make for good conversation, good country, and good times, to bring these 2 bright, bold speakers to you tonight. It's a different model, one that invites difference rather than avoiding it, one that demonstrates that people with different political and ideological views can engage in civil dialogue and even learn something from one another. That's the essence of National Agenda, modeling and encouraging civil dialogue. So I hope you will come away from tonight with some ideas for how to bridge relationships with people in your life who may have divergent viewpoints. Bernie Jacques is a Republican and conservative activist recently named among 30 under 30 rising stars in Florida politics. He's also running for state representative in his home state of Florida. Just a note, by the way, tonight's event is not a campaign event or an endorsement. We've featured running politicians in our programs in the past on both sides of the aisle. Jacques also serves as the Director of Development for Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Tampa Bay. Justin Pierre is both a pastor and a musician. His a cappella group, Committed, won the season 2 title on NBC's The Sing Off in 2010, after which he toured the world and became a multi-award nominated vocalist and recording artist. Here's the thing, they've been friends since middle school. They're both children of Haitian political refugees who fled the country's political instability that put their families at risk. They settled in Florida, and despite their friendship and shared family immigration story, they've reached very different conclusions about political and social issues in the United States, a country they both dearly love. Instead of allowing their difference to tear apart their relationship, they ask, can we imagine a future where we disagree deeply but still like each other? Please welcome to the virtual National Agenda stage, Bernie Jacques and Justin Pierre. Hello and welcome.
Good evening.
Hello. It's so nice to see you. We've had a great conversation with our students earlier today. I know that the 2 of you have a bit of a roadshow prepared that you share with audiences around the country as part of your Respect and Rebellion program. So you're going to address divides facing the nation. You're going to address cancel culture and even delve into some more controversial topics like critical race theory, which we talked about with our students earlier today. So I'm going to hand it over to the both of you, and I'll jump in as I always do with questions because I'm a very inquisitive professor. And we'll have a conversation, and then at 8:30, we'll take questions from the audience. So again, make sure you use that Q&A to ask your question. But with that, I'm going to hand the reins over to you guys. You have sort of a lightning round, if I understand, that you want to engage with. So go for it.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Dr. Hoffman. And we're grateful for the opportunity to be here at the prestigious University of Delaware. And Bernie and I are just going to go back and forth today, sharing our stories, sharing about the divided states of America, and also talking about why we believe that cancel culture should be canceled. And so we're going to start off by just sharing our story, and I'll let my brother and political frenemy go first.
Absolutely. Thank you, Justin. And I'd like to echo our thanks to the University of Delaware. And thank you, Dr. Hoffman, for making this all possible and happen and able to make it happen here this evening. So as Dr. Hoffman mentioned, I'm a child of Haitian refugees, political asylum seekers. And in fact, I was born in Haiti. So I actually moved here with my parents at the age of 7. We moved here to the state of Florida, initially settling and moving in with my uncle in a small town called Immokalee, Florida. And if anybody is familiar with Immokalee, Florida, it's a very, tough area, mostly immigrants. There's a lot of crime in certain pockets, very much different from where a lot of people that I ended up going to school, college, or law school experienced. So from there, we lived with my uncle initially, and then we eventually moved out, had our own place in a mobile home park, in a mobile home. And then, but I remember that being a sense of accomplishment because I saw the progression now that we had our own place. And then from the mobile home, we went to an apartment complex. And we had an apartment, and I saw that as a great win as well, because the AC seemed to work a little better. It was still kind of a rough area, but I could see the progression. I remember when my dad got his first car. And mind you, these are both of my parents worked very hard when we moved here. They both took on 2 jobs, sometimes 3 jobs each. Always teaching my brothers and I that in this country, if you work hard and play by the rules, all things are possible. And basically had a front row seat, to the American dream. And so from that apartment, we eventually moved into East Naples, which is a much better community, but still a working class community. And we had a duplex. And I remember, again, feeling the joy of the progression. It wasn't quite a full house. It was half a house, but, it seems like we're moving on up. And then eventually my parents were able to buy their own home where they still reside today. And that was all less than 10 years. That was less than a decade. All of that happened within from when they came to this country with very little. And so to me, that showed me as a young person, having that kind of front row seat, the promise and the actuality of what America has to offer for anybody who's willing to work hard and do the right things. My dad eventually got his college degree, his bachelor's degree, went to school at night. And both of these folks, my mom and dad, got to see their son. Imagine, from political refugees, in essence, to seeing their son not only serve as an assistant state attorney, become an attorney, serve as an assistant state attorney for the great state of Florida, and then get appointed by Governor Ron DeSantis last year to be on the Judicial Nominating Commission, where I'm helping one of the most popular governors select judges and appoint judges here in the state of Florida, only in America. Only in Florida. And so this is my story. It helped inform my political worldview. My view of it is that, we made no excuses. We didn't accept anything for free or expect anything for free. We put in the work and we saw what it got us. And so that brought me towards my political conservatism, because I do believe when given the tools and opportunities in communities, people can make the best of themselves. And this is still the best place where you can make the best of yourself. And you don't need big overarching government controlling the everyday lives of citizens and enabling them to stay in the same station where they are. Policies need to be there for people to thrive. My family has taken advantage of that. We have seen the benefits of that, and it needs to be preserved. And I only think the conservative way of conservative policies can really foster that type of growth and not inhibit it, like our friends on the left.
Well, thank you for sharing your story, Bernie. I'm going to share a little bit of my experience. So I was actually born and raised in the crazy state of Florida. My parents are from Haiti. They migrated to America in the early 80s, and I was born in the late 80s in Florida. So I just want to see what state everyone else is from. If you can drop it in the chat. But I guarantee you, regardless of what state you're from, there is no state crazier than Florida, America's class clown, Florida, the largest swing state, and home to Florida man, Florida man, Florida man. But shout out to Florida, where I met Bernie. We grew up together. So I grew up in a middle class neighborhood. My parents worked very hard. I lived pretty much from the time I was 4 years old. We moved into our house, and my parents still live in that house to this day. And I attended, good schools. Went to a boarding academy in high school. Went to a HBCU in Huntsville, Alabama, Oakwood University. Studied theology. From there, I was able to experience the entertainment industry. I moved to Los Angeles and was able to win the Sing Off on NBC. Went back to graduate school in Michigan, cold Michigan. If anybody's from Michigan, I don't know how you guys do it, but I survived 3 years of those brutal winters. I got my Master's of Divinity and returned home to Florida to work as a professional pastor. And my first assignment, I was assigned to a conservative Caucasian congregation in Central Florida, an area called Avon Park, Florida, and Highlands County. And it was a rough time because there were people in the congregation who weren't ready to receive a pastor who was Black. And, I did my best to serve and love them. And to make a long story short, I made it a point to be vocal about race relations and the issues going on in our country at that time. And in 2016, after the death of Philando Castile, I was talking about race relations in a sermon, making the point that we all are of the human race and that race is a man-made construct. And I was talking about the sons of Noah in the Bible, how they were from different regions in the world, but they were blood brothers. And so I talked about Philando Castile and race relations at the time. And the next week, I received a notice that I was to pack up my office and cease serving that church because they had a completely different viewpoint, and they were offended that I brought up Philando Castile and I talked about race relations, and they were quite frankly fed up with me and my attempts to have those critical, crucial conversations. And so from that point, I moved to the Bay Area and I was serving there. And I currently pastor in New Jersey. But from my experiences growing up, I'm grateful for my family who instilled the values of hard work and the importance of being a good citizen. And I love America, but I have always had an uncomfortability with America's refusal to acknowledge its root issues. And so growing up in Florida, I remember, simple things like getting pulled over for driving while Black, DWB, and getting harassed and questioned by the officer. And the last thing the officer would say is something like, well, you stay out of trouble, boy. And this is, as an adult in my late 20s. And so these small interactions sometimes serve as reminders that although we've come a long way as a country, we have a mighty long ways to go. So I love America, but I believe that America can do better. And I think the fact that America refuses to have these crucial conversations and is trying to institute what we call bills to limit the truth, I find a problem with that, because if you don't confront something, then you can't change something. And so I believe that with dealing with the truth and talking about the roots of our history and the realities that we often try to shy away from, we can actually find reconciliation and repent of our sins as a nation and strive to dismantle those systems that keep certain people in the place that they are. And so that's kind of my story, a snapshot of my story. And I love America. I'm a proud Democrat. And I cherish my friendship with Bernie, despite our differences. But as mentioned before, our friendship started as children, as young boys. And so I'm a proud Floridian, proud American, but I believe America can do better. So Bernie, I want to talk to you about CRT, that hot word, critical race theory. Everyone's talking about it. We're talking about it in academia. We're talking about it in the legislative halls. What is your take on critical race theory, and why do you think it's such a big topic right now? Is it new or is it old? What do you think?
Well, I think it's becoming more new in the mainstream. Prior to the last couple of years, critical race theory was confined in the faculty halls of places like University of Delaware and the academy and colleges and universities. And now we're seeing it seep into our K through 12 education, which I think it has no place in. Quite frankly, critical race theory really divides. And I've heard it said best and summarized this way. It's a curriculum that teaches people to hate each other, teaches students to hate each other and to hate their country, quite frankly. It creates animosity, it creates resentment. So you imagine if you're a young, white student, you're sitting there in class and you're basically being taught that you're somehow part of an oppressor class. And if you're a young Black student, you're somehow supposed to be a victim just by the nature of the way you look. And I think we need to pump the brakes on this because I think it has a severe impact on true education, real education, instead of indoctrination, and in this case, liberal indoctrination. I'm all for teaching the history. There's a difference between teaching historical facts and events, and there's a difference between injecting ideology and a viewpoint that is attached to these historical events. And so I always make the case that, look, in Florida, in our textbooks and in our curriculum, it is required to teach things like slavery, the Jim Crow era, segregation, the Holocaust. But what critical race theory does, it takes it a step further, adds ideology, and somehow tries to create some kind of discord or some kind of notion that this is some kind of a country where minorities cannot succeed. And somehow, if you are part of the majority race, you need to apologize for something. I think that's destructive. We don't need people hating their country, hating each other in our schools.
Yeah, this is where we disagree, because I believe that critical race theory is a tool for understanding. So it's literally a framework that allows you to see the reality of America and the many layers that comprise of America. And so I don't believe that CRT is attacking a certain group or attacking Caucasians or attacking certain people. It's literally bringing to light the systems that make up the framework of our country. And so I know that whenever CRT is brought up, it sparks emotion. But when you recognize the reality and the roots of our nation, you have to recognize it in order to advance and to move beyond where you are to where you need to be. And so by refusing to confront something, you cannot change something. So, the thing that makes it so controversial is because many folks feel attacked. They feel like you're calling me a bad person. But the reality is you are bringing to light a system, not an individual. So the criminal justice system, the education system, the labor market, the housing market, the healthcare system. These are all systems with layers of injustice embedded in them. And the fact that our country refuses to acknowledge how baked in the injustice and racism is in our country is sad. And I believe that until we are at a place where we are ready to talk about it openly and to have that dialogue and to confess of our sins, if I might say, as a country, we won't be able to really be unified as a people. Because the reality is, if we keep acting like nothing's wrong and we're living in a post-racial America, we're deceived. It's an illusion of inclusion. We are living in the yet to be United States of America. And so we're not attacking people. We're calling out social institutions. And I know people often identify themselves and they can see themselves in a institution, but we're not attacking the person. We're attacking the product of these systems of racism. And so we talked about it in the class earlier with Dr. Hoffman that about 22 states have already issued bills, and some other states are having conversations about whether they should implement some of these hindrances or not. But I want to take a quick poll for everyone with us this afternoon, this evening in the Zoom chat. Do you think CRT is essential in our curriculums? I'm sorry, the chat is turned off for the audience, so you can't respond now, but I want you to reflect. Do you think the CRT is essential, or do you think it is over the top or unnecessary? That's a question that will be rhetorical since the chat is closed. But Bernie, in the state of Florida, go ahead.
We can open that up in the Q&A at 8:30 for sure. But I think this is so fascinating to see two friends who fundamentally disagree on this issue. So how do you guys engage in dialogue around this issue? Do you decide not to talk about it? Do you talk about it with certain rules in mind? How do you make sure that it remains civil?
I believe that it's important to listen, not to respond, but to try to understand the person who's speaking. So I know that no matter how many times I talk to Bernie about certain issues, I will not change his mind. I will never convince Bernie that CRT is essential and should be mandatory. But what I can do is listen to Bernie, and what Bernie can do is listen to me. And throughout our conversation, we can actually see and connect the dots that lead to our positions. And so by hearing Bernie's position, I can now have a better understanding of, okay, this is probably why he feels that way. But if I'm unwilling to listen to him, then there can be no constructive discussion. There can be no productive dialogue if you're unwilling to sit and listen, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you don't like what you hear. You need to learn how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. I'll let Bernie chime in.
Yeah, and before I answer that specific question, Dr. Hoffman, I do have a quick rebuttal for my good friend Justin here. He mentioned, the sins of the nation, and that's my issue with critical race theory. It dwells. It's a theory that seems to want to dwell and finds comfort and harping on the sins, the historical sins of the nation, as opposed to looking forward and to talk about how far we've come and so forth. And so it creates this dynamic between students that somehow we're living in a Jim Crow era, which we're not. I mean, there's never been more opportunities for Black people in this country, and I would probably submit in world history than right here, right now in the United States of America. And so what I don't want our students, we're talking about K through 12, these are children, to leave away with, especially students who look like me. I would hate for them to leave a class after being indoctrinated with the CRT, thinking that somehow the chips are stacked against them and that they cannot be their best in the USA. And part of my success is that I had this very limitless idea that all things are possible in the United States. I actually believed that, and I pursued it. I didn't go around thinking there was somebody in the corner at every turn trying to stop my success. I don't think that's the case in 2021. And I want our young people of color, to be optimistic about where they are and not to go around feeling as victims. And it's not fair for a white student who may even have a struggling life, for somehow they think there's some kind of an oppressor when they've done nothing wrong. But to answer your question, Dr. Hoffman, I think, it helps that Justin and I are friends. I think build genuine friendships first, because when you build genuine friendships, you don't question the motives of your friends. And you know they're coming to their perspectives in an honest fashion. And so even though you may not agree, they're an honest actor and you can level with a person like that. And I say it all the time, don't get into these conversations expecting to change the other person's mind. I never do that with Justin. I know he's very principled, he's entrenched in what he believes, and so am I. But I can at least take away how he got to his views. I can understand better how people like Justin think. and I can appreciate it better, as opposed to just writing it off, even though I may not agree with it. It gives me a better understanding of how people on the left get to the conclusions that they get to.
Well, it's a fascinating conversation. It does look like we do have a poll that is going out to the community, but I would like to switch gears a little bit and talk to you both about your own experiences and really try to get at some concrete ways that people who disagree with each other can find commonalities. But I think first, I really want to talk about Haiti. The country's been in the news a lot the past couple of days because of the mass migration of 10 to 15,000 Haitians coming from South and Central America, sleeping under a border bridge in South Texas as they tried to make a home in the United States. The crisis snagged the country's attention this week as photos and video of Border Patrol agents on horses chasing Haitian migrants with what in one case appeared to be a whip got national attention. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said he was horrified by the images. At the same time, the United States is preparing to nearly double deportations of Haitians at the border, potentially 1,000 per day, reports the Washington Post. So help us understand, just because I'm hoping you have some personal insight here, how did we get here? How did these Haitian migrants end up in Central and South America in the first place? And how does the recent assassination of the president and the devastating earthquake in Haiti play a role in what's happening right now?
Bernie?
Yeah, so I mean, what we're seeing right now is a very, very sad and terrible situation, a humanitarian crisis of great proportion. I think what you're seeing in Haiti has been kind of the story of Haiti for many, many decades. The instability, the poverty, the lack of rule of law that makes many people want to flee and get out and seek a better life. All that being said, there is a proper way to do this. And it still remains unclear how Haitians ended up being transported from Haiti, an island nation, through Central America, all the way up to the Texas border. But what it shows is there's definitely a desperation that would make somebody want to do this. That's not to excuse entering the country illegally. I'm very much firm on legal immigration as opposed to illegal crossings. And I think if you don't have a border as a nation, you really don't have a nation. People need to be vetted as to who comes in and who doesn't come in. And we need to know who all is coming in. And I will submit that this is kind of a crisis. I talk to people who are very close to the situation, people within my own family, that squarely put the blame at the feet of this current administration. That's when they campaigned, it was a clear reversal of the zero tolerance policy that we saw under the Trump administration. It was almost an invitation for migrants to come. So we've been seeing migrant crises along the border ever since this new administration has come into office. And certainly this is adding to that. And so some of the images do appear disturbing, but what I will say is, to kind of analyze the facts as opposed to snapshots and draw conclusions. There's this whole thing being made about the Border Patrol on horses holding a whip. I don't see that as the case. These look like reins for the horses, and never once has anybody shown me a video of a migrant being whipped. They take a snapshot of a Border Patrol agent on horseback holding the reins to his horse. And so we cannot let media narratives fit a certain political ideology to make it seem as if Americans are somehow cruel. Americans have an obligation to secure its borders. And I think this is what's happening with our brave men and women at the border. But it doesn't help when you have an administration that's sending mixed signals and saying, come on in, the water's great.
Yeah, I'll chime in. I'll admit that image was just devastating. And I think people are disappointed. They're angry because that visual represents the reality of America over the past years, the visual I'm speaking of, whether it was a whip or a rain, doesn't matter, but the visual is disturbing. But the reality is that America has not done right by Haiti for decades. You can go back to President Jimmy Carter. You can talk about Reagan. You can talk about George Bush. You can talk about Clinton. You can talk about Bush again. You can talk about Obama. You can talk about Trump. You know, it seems to me that America has different policies for Haitians, different policies for brown immigrants. And so I'm just frustrated with the hypocrisy that I see. I know that, you know, everyone knows that they're in a crisis right now. And I want to highlight the fact that Haiti is a beautiful nation with resilient people. And before Haiti became the way it was the jewel of the Antilles. The island of Hispaniola was a very, very rich country. And I want you to know that in 1804, if you don't know about this, the revolution that the Haitians were able to accomplish, they were able to free themselves and be the first Black independent nation. And as a result of their independence, many other countries, America, France, continually have made them pay for their freedom. In other words, they didn't want their freedom to inspire others in America, in other countries. It was a real revolution. You can read about it in 1804, Toussaint Louverture. But the reality is France, made Haiti pay billions of dollars. And, so it's a combination of exterior exploitation and internal corruption. These are the things that led Haiti from being one of the most richest, prosperous nations to being the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere. And so I don't want you to think that this situation in Haiti is because Haiti is cursed or because they worship voodoo or whatever people are saying. Haiti has been destroyed, and it's been by systemic designs. So I'm not pointing fingers at one person or one country or one nation, but even America has played a part in the state that Haiti is today. And so the reality is it's a humanitarian crisis, as my brother Bernie said. There's been an earthquake. The president's dead. Gangs are running rampant. Things are terrible. And people are seeking a better life. So I know President Biden has been, using Title 42, which was brought on by the previous president, President Donald Trump, which means that if there's a pandemic and you can just send them away in order to keep your country safe. But I'm just wondering, why can't we test them? Why can't we treat them if they have COVID? Why are we so quick to send them away instead of giving them due process so that they can at least have a chance to survive? Because these people have been traveling for a while.
Many of them left in 2010, right?
Yes. And so they've been in some of them were in Mexico for a few years. Some of them have been in other areas. And now we have seen them make their way to our borders. And it's sad to me. I want to say this, I know I'm speaking at the University of Delaware. I know that you have the Joseph R. Biden School of Public Policy. I'm a Democrat, but I am disappointed in our current president because he broke his promise. He made promises at the beginning of his campaign. He made promises at the beginning of his presidency. So I pray that America will hold President Biden accountable.
All right. Well, it's a fascinating conversation. And I'm sure if the president were here, he'd love to enjoy having the conversation with you both. He loves the idea of civil dialogue and speaking across differences. So let me shift to that topic before we go to the Q&A. I have this under my list of things as a civil dialogue how-to. So before we can even think about speaking across differences, we must approach conversations with empathy and what students in my class are learning about, a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset. So a question for you, Justin, from Nick. You posted on your Instagram that talked about growth mindsets. So help us understand what a growth mindset is versus a fixed mindset, and any tips you might have for engaging in conversation with people who are sort of set in a fixed mindset, and how you can also help to develop your own growth mindset. So it's not just about your interlocutor, but it's about yourself as well.
Indeed. I believe that the moment that you believe that you have arrived, the moment that you stop growing, you start dying. And so I believe that it is important for us to continue to evolve as people, as students, as people living in this country. And so a growth mindset is a mindset that is embracing of discomfort, embracing of challenges, because every opposition is an opportunity to be better, to rise to the occasion. And so, if you are, like me, and you're a Democrat and you refuse to have a conversation with a Republican because they're wrong and you're right, that's a fixed mindset. But if you have a growth mindset, you'll say, I'm confident in what I believe. I'm not going to change my mind, but I believe that I should at least hear what my friend has to say. That's a growth mindset, because I believe that I can still learn from somebody else. I can always hear Bernie talk and take the meat and spit out the bones, right? You don't have to, agree with somebody to be agreeable, So it's important for you to be able to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, to be willing to stretch yourself, to reach out to people that you technically want to avoid, people that you might be tempted to cancel. Those are the people that you need to lean into and reach out and find a commonality and build a bridge. I mentioned it in the class earlier. I want to mention it to all our people here today, that we all have a sweet spot, right? As a human being, Republican, independent, I don't care what you are, Democrat, you have a sweet spot. You have a strength, you have a weakness, you have education, you have experience, and you have a talent. And so regardless of your tax bracket, your socioeconomic status, I don't care who you are, where you've been, what you've done, you have a sweet spot. And so you should lean into your strengths, lean into your weaknesses, lean into your education, lean into your experience, lean into your talent, and leverage it to grow and be better than you were yesterday. So that's a growth mindset.
Thank you so much. Bernie, do you want to add on to that?
No, not a whole lot. I mean, I think it's healthy, to discuss with others who think differently than you. I'm a big believer in this idea of the marketplace of ideas, the public square where all can come and discuss their views without intimidation or without cancellation, and that we can have competing ideas, and that's what's healthy in a republic like ours, and people can take it or leave it. But I think all sorts of viewpoints should be heard, and people can assess them accordingly, and genuinely see where people are coming from. Again, Justin and I, we've been going at it for years. I don't think we've ever changed each other's minds, but definitely have some takeaways from all of our different conversations.
So what happens, Ben is wondering, one of my students is wondering, what's your advice on how to engage in a civil dialogue or conversation with someone who you already know from the get-go has the polar opposite or non-negotiable views on a certain controversial topic like gun control, abortion, immigration? How do you talk to people to understand them? Because I think what both of you are saying is that it's beneficial to understand the other point of view, not just to be an open-minded individual, but as we talked earlier today, to be able to understand the other point of view, to be persuasive if you're trying to convince someone of something. So if you come across someone who has got the polar opposite of what your position is, what's the best way to approach that conversation?
I would do some research, and before you try to approach them with how you disagree with them or what you don't have in common, try to find the commonality. What are you both for? You both might be against something, but what are you both for? And let that be the bridge, the transitional point from where you can begin a dialogue and a discussion in a productive way. Because I think a lot of times we typically enter conversations with our own predisposed ideas, and we know we're not going to change our mind, but we think that we're going to change someone else's mind. I don't know why we think that, still silly us. But, it takes emotional humility to have the conversation. Everyone talks about IQ. Yeah, IQ. What about your emotional intelligence? What about your emotional humility? Are you willing to just sit in the awkward place and listen? Are you willing to reach out to someone else that may have said something that offended you because you want them to know how it made you feel and you want to hear their perspective so you can better understand why they feel what they feel, why they believe what they believe? And so it's that emotional humility that is key. You can know all the information in the world, but if you lack those emotional skills, that emotional strength and humility, you won't be able to have a productive dialogue, because nobody likes arrogant people. You need to be humble. You need to be likable. So don't be a jerk. Be nice.
That's good advice. Bernie?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, know what your objective is going into that conversation. If it's just to be adversarial and to dunk on them, then reevaluate that. If you want to have a real good productive conversation, again, don't go in expecting that you're going to change the other person's mind. Go in, as a good faith actor to hear where they're coming from. Don't have an adversarial tone. And hopefully, they can give you the same courtesy to see where you are coming from. And so that's the kind of things I like to take away from the conversations with people I disagree with. And it's not to say everybody's the same, because there are some people you may change their minds. If somebody's not, in this type of situation, somebody who's firmly rooted, it's very rare that they shift. But there's people I casually have conversations with who later on, years later, said, hey, remember when we had that conversation? I kind of see what you're talking about. But it was conversations where it was pleasant. It wasn't a shouting match. And it was conversations where you ask that additional question. They make a statement of belief that may seem radical or just beyond the pale. Simply take a step back, take a deep breath, and ask them why. Why do you believe that? How did you come to that conclusion? And that will really open your eyes that people aren't as loony as you may think. And there's a lot of rationality behind people's political perspectives on how they got there, whether it be their experience or how they reason. So I think, again, disagreeing without being disagreeable. I'm an attorney by trade, by training. And, one of the things we learn in trial advocacy, when you question the opposing witness, it's called cross-examination. We had a great professor who said, cross without being cross. And so kind of going with that mindset to have a pleasant conversation as possible. And I think you'll get through more than you think, and you'll learn something as well.
It's great advice. So we've been a little bit serious about this topic of civil dialogue, but I'm curious, do you ever find that engaging with diverse viewpoints can be fun, like a fun endeavor? Can it be exciting and enjoyable to kind of practice these skills of speaking across difference?
Yeah, I find some of Bernie's views quite comical. Sometimes all I can do is just laugh, SMH, shake my head, and just like, how am I friends with this guy? But you know what? I listen to him and I hear his perspectives, and I'm not changed by his perspectives, but he's my friend, and that's okay. And I believe that democracy is a contact sport. You got to get personal. You got to get close, even to the people that you are tempted and itching to cancel. Don't do it. Get close to them. It's a contact sport.
Yeah, I find some enjoyment in it. Obviously, former lawyer who practiced in the courtroom as a prosecutor. I was trained to be in the adversarial system and did debate and mock trial and all that good stuff. And so I love a good exchange of ideas, and that's a lot of fun for me. And obviously, running for office, it's you're advancing your ideals and your views and juxtaposing it with your political opponents for the consumption of the voting public as to where they want to go. And so I think it's really essential, to our form of government to have all of the different ideas and not to snuff out the ones you disagree with, because it does the voters in this instance a disservice on how they will choose their leaders who will legislate on their behalf. They need to hear all the perspectives, and I think it's very essential to a republic as ours.
Well, okay, so let's get into some actual tips. One of the things I tell my students is one of the best things to do if you are engaged in a conflict is to lower the stakes of the argument. So if you're discussing immigration reform, for example, it's unlikely that either you or your interlocutor will be able to establish or revise immigration policy, right? What are some of your tips for civil discourse across differences, like actual tools that people can bring into conversations when they're starting to feel that it's getting a little bit tenuous?
Yeah, learn the art of the pivot. You got to learn how to pivot sometimes. Sometimes when you're reading the situation, you see where the conversation is going and things are getting heated and tense. Sometimes you got to find that little humor, that little space to just pivot from, to kind of ease the tension. Because the reality is, conversations can get intense, and, tempers flare, emotions rise in the moment. But I think at the end of the day, don't forget to breathe. Take a moment to just, soak in where you are and what you are doing. And so just be aware. I think being able to read cues is great. Like, there's a book called I Can Read You Like a Book. It's a book about body language. So, like, you can read their body language to see if they seem comfortable or open. Like, people, don't just communicate with their mouths. Like, our whole body communicates a message even before you open your mouth. And so just being aware of those physical cues and, speak in a still small voice. You don't have to yell all the time. Like, you don't have to be like that. You can just have a civil conversation. Those are just some practical tips that I could think of. Bernie?
Yeah, I'd echo all of those. Again, just turn down the temperature, have a good, decent conversation, focus on the commonalities, give deference where it's needed, give affirmation where it's needed, and then and hopefully it's afforded to you as well. And then if it's getting to a point where it's just shouting match, and then it no longer becomes productive, and you got to pivot and get out of the conversation. Either talk about something else or say, all right, I know, I see where you're coming from, I hear you. It's good chatting with you, and just kind of end it before it gets non-productive, and or pivot to the next topic where all minds can agree on. So yeah, just kind of bring down that temperature.
Yeah, I'm raising my hand like I'm in class, but one word of advice: don't attack the person, deal with the issue. Right? So stay on task. Even if you disagree with them, never attack them. Just deal with the issue at hand and keep it moving.
Yeah. No name calling. That's my number one rule.
Please, no, please.
No name calling, even of people who aren't in the room. Like, it doesn't do any good. So I love that the theme that's coming up this year so far in terms of thinking about civil dialogue and civil discourse is active listening. And both of you have mentioned that listening is really important. And I love Bernie saying, I hear you is a way to demonstrate to the other person, yeah, I'm listening to what you're saying. I might not agree with it, and we might pivot. I think pivoting is a great technique for saying, like, okay, let's move on. But to say I hear you is an acknowledgement of that person's humanity, and says, I respect you. I respect who you are and your ideas. I don't necessarily agree with you, but I hear you. So we're gonna open this up to Q&A. So I just want to alert folks in the audience to continue to ask your questions in the Q&A. We will have that poll ready about critical race theory very, very soon. I have a couple of questions before we jump to the audience. One of my students, Caitlin, asked if you've ever avoided a conversation with each other on a topic where you knew you would disagree.
I don't think I've ever avoided a conversation, but if I don't want to talk about it, I won't bring it up. But if it comes up, I'll talk about it. That's kind of how I operate. So,
do you ever? Well, I guess you pivot if you are like, okay.
Yeah, if I don't want to really engage on that topic, and let's say I'm offended, or I'm done with the conversation, then I'll pivot and I'll say a compliment here or there, and honor him as a person, and say, hey, I heard you say this. I disagree, but I'm no longer in a place to have this conversation and pivot to somewhere else. Or, you know, if he won't back down, if I'm in person and talking and carrying on and I want to stop talking and he doesn't want to stop talking, you have the right to walk away. Like, you don't have to entertain every conversation. So just use your wisdom and just, you know, do whatever you deem is best respectfully.
So I want Bernie to respond to that too, but I think I want to add to that question, like, how do you nurture the friendship if you have these kind of fundamental differences? So Bernie, I'll pass the question to you, which is, have you avoided a conversation with Justin because you knew you would disagree? And then how do you kind of nurture that friendship?
Yeah, look, there's certain things, again, that, he's not going to budge on and I'm not going to budge on. Like during this last election, I mean, there were quite a bit of articles or memes that I was tempted to forward to my good friend Justin. And after much reflection, I'm like, there's no point. I mean, I'm not going to rile up the guy. It's not going to change anything. So use your judgment, right? And every now and then I would send something, but I mean, it's not, you don't always have to bombard somebody with information that fits your viewpoint, especially when I mean, it's not gonna accomplish anything. Lower the stakes. You're not gonna save the republic by sending that meme. And so think about it, before you do certain things, just to kind of nurture and just not get into a whole tussle. But every now and then we'll get into it. But yeah, that's how I assess that. Every now and then I'm like, is it necessary? I'll send it to someone else.
Yeah, I'll chime in also. I think one of the things that that I think about for our friendship is that, the greater good. Like, what is the good that can come out of me maintaining this friendship, me maintaining this relationship? And every time I think about that question, I think Florida, right? So I have a love and a care for Florida, and he does too. I want to see Florida do well. I want to see Florida be the best state in America. He does too. We just have different viewpoints on what it'll take to get there. But we have the same passion for our people, for our home state. We're passionate about the Haitian people. We're proud Haitians. So we have a lot in common that we could lean into. And there's more in common that we have than there is more that we have in opposition.
I think that's important to understand. That I think sometimes, particularly students who are watching cable news or, listening to these political debates, they think, oh my God, people hate each other on each side. And it's oftentimes there are lots of folks like the two of you who are able to say, we disagree, but we're still friends. So I'm going to, again, ask for some questions to come in the Q&A. I'm going to wrap up my last question with our speakers. I'm also going to let you know that the Q&A is a little different because we're online. Some folks on our end have been reading through all of your questions that you've been submitting. And please, again, there's still time to submit your question. For each question chosen, one of my students, I'm so proud of my National Agenda students, they're going to read the question for you. I'm calling them audience surrogates, whether that's the right term or not. But before we get to that, I'm going to start with a question from one of my students for each of you, which I think is a good segue into the Q&A. This is from Nurali, and he asks if you could give one piece of advice to college students about how to communicate with those who think differently from you, what would you say?
Just don't shy away from it. Don't shy away from it, and invite the dialogue, and really, go into it, not necessarily thinking you're going to convince the other person, but gather how they came to their conclusion, and hopefully, again, the same will be afforded to you. But don't hide away from people who think differently than you. I think if anywhere that should be cherished and promoted, it should be on a college campus where ideas are freely exchanged. And so take advantage of that for sure.
Yeah. And my advice is to be comfortable with who you are. Own what you believe, own it confidently. It's okay. And it's not a sign of weakness to listen to other people's viewpoints, even if it's different and you don't agree with it. It's not a sign of weakness to listen to others. And so every time you have an opportunity to listen to others and hear their differences and whatever it is, lean into it. Don't shy away from the opportunity, because you're missing out on a growth hack. And the growth hack is being a listener that is active and being able to just hear their heart, hear their mind, and just connect the dots, so that instead of being drawn further apart, you can at least draw closer to them as a fellow human, because that is what you have in common with them. They're a human being just like you. They deserve dignity, respect, and the opportunity to build relationships. And so don't miss out on the opportunity to lean in and listen. And don't think that listening to others or other viewpoints is a sign of weakness. You can still be who you are and listen to others without losing who you are.
That's a fantastic point. I love that. That it's actually a sign of strength to say, like, I have my own opinion, but I would love to hear what you have to think about this particular issue. And again, I think Bernie said this as well, but again, lowering the stakes and be like, it's not, neither you or I nor I are going to solve this problem. We can talk about it. You don't have to be belligerent and take a stand. Like, let's just have a conversation about it. And I feel like, as a professor of communication, it's unfortunate that I feel like a lot of our media outlets are demonstrating the wrong model for how to communicate about politics. And I think we need to see more conversations. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the chat. Are you having problems with my sound, or is it okay?
I hear you fine, but I'm not
sure.
Yeah.
We hear you.
All right, I'm just checking the chat here. So again, please enter your questions in the Q&A. We should also have the critical race theory poll ready to go. And we should have the first question from the audience coming out. Here's the poll coming out. Do you feel critical race theory is necessary? I'll assume that this means in courses and education. I think that the question differs depending on whether you're talking about young people versus college students. I mean, critical race theory has been taught in college courses for a very long time, just as has critical feminist theory and other types of theories. I don't think there have always been a lot of conversations about critical race theory in the K through 12 sphere. But I do think that with the introduction of the 1619 project a couple of years ago, with curricular resources for elementary and high school students, it alerted people to something that they might have been concerned about. And but I do think that there aren't really like any, as far as I'm aware of, like any massive efforts to implement critical race theory on elementary and high school students. It's still a concern that it's worth talking about. So it does look like we have a majority of saying, yeah, critical race theory is necessary. It is important. If we'd asked this among a different audience, as both Justin and Bernie have acknowledged, if you were at Brigham Young University versus another, you've been in many different environments where, as Justin said, you're the home team versus the away team. This differs depending on where you are. And in Delaware, we tend to have a somewhat more liberal student body. But if I can just say here, I think Ryan is our next audience surrogate, who's one of my students, and he's going to be asking a question from one of our audience members. So Ryan, if you're ready, let's ask the question.
Thank you, Dr. Hoffman, and also thank you both so much for coming here today. I'd like to thank you on behalf of the UD student body for having this dialogue with us. The conversation you both had on critical race theory prompted many questions from the audience. Lisa Alexander asks, without it, aren't we erasing a large part of our history? And Samya Sherman asks, do you believe we can teach it in schools once it's been evaluated and critiqued?
I'll jump in on this. No, I don't think it erases history. Again, there's a big difference between teaching the hard fact history and critical race theory, which actually attaches ideology to the history. So you can teach slavery, segregation, Jim Crow without saying, oh, because of that, there are systemic hurdles and somehow, the conclusion is you're somehow a victim, and basically create an environment where it foments disdain almost for your own country and for your fellow countrymen, in this case, your classmates who may look different than you. I think it's very dangerous to be teaching that type of thing in a K through 12 context. It's totally different from the history. I want the historical facts to be taught. I don't want to shy away from that. I was a history major. I love history. But it's different to put on an ideological cap and then make conclusions and then try to present it as if it is fact when it is not. And so that is the danger, I think, with teaching critical race theory. It leaves students leaving the classroom with a different kind of mindset and a worldview that I do not think is productive as citizens and as young people. I do not want, again, students who look like me thinking that they're somehow victims and somehow the country has the chip stacked against them. And it's not fair for that white student, through no fault of their own, had no kind of participation in the wrongs of the past, to somehow feel guilty about what was done. I mean, this is wrong. It creates discord, and it does not, and it diminishes progress.
Yeah. So I disagree, of course, because I believe that critical race theory has become the new boogeyman for the people who want to erase the truth of this nation's history. So the reality is, it literally highlights the systems that have led us to where we have been and where we are now, right? So it's acknowledging the systemic injustices that lead to where we are now as a nation. So I don't believe that it is attacking specific people, although people may play a part in maintaining those systems and not speaking out against them. But the reality is, just like a cake, just like sugar is baked in a cake, these layers of systemic injustices are baked in the fabric of America. And for us to be unwilling to examine the ingredients, I think it's crazy, because the reality is, this is who we are as a nation. This is what we have done to get to where we are. And we need to be okay with acknowledging and letting people know how things are. And then perhaps from there, we can talk about the way things should be. And I don't believe that it makes those who are affected by those systems and constructs victims. It just gives you an awareness of where you are. And it's a reminder that we have work to do as a nation. That's how I feel about CRT.
And let me do a quick rebuttal. And that's the thing, the system and constructs, I think, and a lot of my fellow Americans agree with me, that a lot of these system and constructs are imaginary in present day. We can look at historical clear systems that were meant to divide and to oppress, or just that were wrong, that we can all agree with. But to say right now in 2021 that there's somehow systems and constructs that are so overwhelming that should be ingrained in the minds of K through 12 students, I think is erroneous. Mind you, we live in a country, and there are people alive today who had to go to a different school because of the color of their skin, who had to drink from a different water fountain because of the color of their skin, and had to sit on the back of a bus because of how they look. And yet, these same people in the same lifetime got to see somebody by the name of a Black person, by the name of Barack Hussein Obama, by no means a traditional American name, get elected not once, but twice. I would submit to you, after the second time, a lot of us knew he wasn't that good of a president, but yet he still got elected. So to me, how was that a systemically racist country, or a country that is so oppressive, that the same people who lived through actual oppression got to see somebody by the name of Barack Hussein Obama, a man of color, get elected twice in a country that is supposedly racist? If this is a racist country, wow, we're doing a bad job at it.
And we saw what Barack Obama endured as president of America, what he was called, how people talked about him. So we are not living in a post-racial country. we have work to do as a nation. And until we deal with our realities, deal with our history, and to deal with how we have rebranded those same histories into this present day, we can't move forward and improve and change what we will not confront. So that's how I feel about it. We may disagree, but I heard you, Bernie. I heard what you said.
Much appreciated.
That's what I love about this. We had the same conversation in class today, and it's like, I hear you. We might disagree. Let's move on. And I think that's a great pivot. Okay, so we do have another question from the audience. I think Margot is next to ask a question on behalf of one of our audience members.
Thank you, Dr. Hoffman. And thank you, like Ryan said, thank you both for being here. The next question actually comes from a UD professor, Jenny Lamb. And she asks, are these kinds of difficult conversations possible when one person believes things that are false? Sorry.
So it's demonstrably false. Like you can say that information is not correct. How do you engage in that conversation? Thank you, Margot.
Yeah, that's a tough question because everybody believes that their opinion is fact anyways. And so, I mean, unless someone's walking around with a literal universal fact checker, like how do we know what truth is? We have strong convictions. We are saturated with media that feeds us all different information depending on who you subscribe to. We have social media that allows you to be an expert. If you Google something, you are now an expert and you can share your opinion. And so I don't know, it's just a tough situation, but I do believe that having that emotional humility and being willing to listen to others is the key. Viewing the next person as a human being and having compassion and a genuine love for them will go a very long way with even someone you disagree with. And so that's my take for now. I'll let Bernie take a stab at it.
Yeah, I think it's just taking a step back and realizing a lot of what people, I feel like we're seeing this more and more. A lot of people feel that their opinions are automatic facts. You know, when you're discussing issues, especially of public policy, they're just your perspectives on how to get into a certain outcome. And so they're your viewpoints, they're your beliefs. And so I think people need to take a step back. And I think it would minimize them being offended and just kind of dismissing the people they're discussing with. If they realize, you know, a lot of things they hold near and dear are actually their own beliefs, and they're not as verifiable as they may think. You know, an example I would use is, you know, you can, you know, there's certain things, dates, you know, science, math, you know, you can definitely point to and say, no, that is wrong. You know, the date in which this thing occurred was that, and you're wrong. So you can have a good conversation or stand on solid ground by saying, hey, the Civil War ended in 1865. But it's another thing to say, well, everybody who succeeded from the Union, you know, did it for this reason. This was the reason, when there could be other factors, and it could be a conversation, you know, that someone can have and say, well, no, this certain person from that state decided this was the reason why they wanted to secede from the Union. And this person, yeah, they, you know, this was their view. And you can have that discussion. So, but you can have an overarching opinion and say, no, the secession movement was about this particular issue, but it's still it's an opinion that there is room to discuss, as opposed to a hard and fast date where you can verify and say, no, this is when it occurred. So I would really caution people to just take a step back, that not all of their opinions are facts.
Yeah. And the reality is we're living in a time where identity politics is prevalent. So, you know, my political beliefs are a part of who I am. So if you disagree with my political stance, you are attacking me. And I feel like my life is threatened, and I'm going to fight back right now because I'm standing up for my life. So like, this level of polarization is toxic. And if it does not get under control, it's going to get really ugly in America, you know? So I would love to see more people embrace the concept of just seeing the other person as not the enemy, but as a human being, and being willing to listen and learn and be respectful in the process.
Well, and that's what we do here at National Agenda. It's the whole purpose of this for the last 11 years we've been doing this is to demonstrate civil dialogue and to demonstrate that it's possible to have conversations across differences without being disagreeable, I think was the term that you guys used. And I'm excited to be a part of this initiative on University of Delaware's campus. I think we're doing really great work here at UD, and I know my students are impacted by this kind of conversation. So let's move on to the next question. I think my student Trey is going to ask the next audience question.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Hoffman, and thank you to our two guest speakers. This question is from UD student Ann Hicks. She says, you say never attack the person, attack the issue. What should you do when the issue has to do with your personal identity? For example, transgender rights or racial oppression.
Great question. Thank you, Trey.
Very insightful question. I think when the issue hits close to home, it's really hard to not allow your emotions to provoke you to a response that might not be productive. So I think the most important thing to do is to focus on the issue, and you can use your experience and your closeness to that issue and leverage it to share your viewpoint. So I believe that your experience is your expertise. I think that your experience is something that you can tap into to leverage as your sweet spot, as a part of your sweet spot. And so leaning into your reality and how it makes you feel, express that, share it. And so if you disagree with what is said and it hurts you, you can tell them how it made you feel and tell them why. You don't just have to respond out of vindictiveness because you've been hurt, but just communicate how you feel, why you feel that way, and what they can do next time to make you feel a different way next time they want to express themselves.
Yeah, and if you're having that conversation and you're having a conversation with somebody where you're making a very strong point that you're so passionate about, and you can see that that particular issue affects them personally, add that disclaimer, add the caveat and say, look, this is not a personal attack on you, but I want you to know why I feel this way. It's not to say I'm attacking you, but here's my view on it. Kind of set the parameters, throw a preamble in there and just kind of set the tone in order to do that. Not necessarily, especially if the person is receptive, to not shy away from the issues. But if it's a situation where it's to the degree where it's so hurtful that you cannot have it and it won't be productive, then I mean, you like Justin said earlier, you have a right to not be part of certain conversations. That's different than you saying that person does not have a right to say these things at all. There's a difference. You don't have to participate in it, but that person has every right to espouse their viewpoints on a certain issue, I think, in our society. And it should be. And it's one of the things that makes us stand out as a society in the world. This is a thing we take for granted quite a bit. So the silencing and the canceling of others is I believe, is what despot societies do. And we shouldn't have that here. And so a lot of things will make you feel uncomfortable, but democracy and living in a republic is uncomfortable because it invites all to participate. And so there's a distinction there between you personally engaging and you silencing somebody because they may have a view that may be very personal to you.
Well, I think it's a great opportunity to plug one of our upcoming events, and we'll go back to the Q&A. October 18th through 24th is Free Speech Week, and we're going to be hosting several speakers virtually about various issues around free speech and the First Amendment. And I'm very excited about that. So please be looking forward to that. Check out cpc.ul.edu for more information around that. We have another question that my student Kaylee is going to ask from our audience.
Thank you, Dr. Hoffman, and thank you guys again for being here. This question is more directed towards Bernie. And it is from Mary Maureen Stone of Wilmington. And she asks, how do you think your story would have changed if you were a child of a single parent who works hard but only has one income?
I don't think it would have changed much. I think, things may have taken longer for us to achieve what we achieved. But if it's the same mother I have, I know we would have punched through nevertheless. I mean, she's the hardest working person I know. And so a lot of my viewpoints, derive, not only from my father, but from my mom, who immediately just dove into work and really made no excuses. And I really took away from that if you contribute, you get what you put in America. And that's the beauty of the capitalist system, that if you can contribute, you can add value. It doesn't matter what you look like, your services will be needed and will be utilized, because it's a system that uses talents and contributions to monetize. And so it's actually one of the best guards against systemic racism, because you can see somebody that can add value to your firm, to your company. And if they're talented, they can do the work, they're going to get the opportunity. And I learned that at an early age, and I've seen it. And so I don't think it would have changed much. I think it would have changed if I had different parents of different dispositions, of different outlooks on these things. And I remember just growing up being puzzled. And imagine, we're first generation Americans, and we saw the country for what it was, having just left Haiti. We saw the limitless opportunities, and I would see some of my fellow Americans who are still, struggling. And look, I'm not, casting blame or any kind of judgment, but sometimes it made you wonder as a kid, without fully forming my viewpoints, like, how are we able to make it? And we just came here, we barely knew the language. Clearly, there's something missing, because it can be done. We did it with very little, with Black skin, and barely knowing the language initially. And so if this is not a testament that all things are possible in America, and that there are no present systems holding you back, it's good to study the barriers, but don't delude yourself to thinking that the same systems of the Jim Crow era are still around. I don't think it's productive. And I think it really is a mindset thing that really helps somebody's trajectory.
Justin, do you want to add to that?
I would just say that Jim Crow is gone, yes, but the new Jim Crow is here, and it has simply been rebranded. So I disagree with Bernie, but I heard what you said, Bernie. I heard you, bro.
Awesome. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. And my student Ryan is going to ask this for our audience.
Thank you, Dr. Hoffman. This question comes from UD student Nicole Travis, representing my home state of New Jersey. She asks, do you think your approach would work for differences between a parent and a child? How would you approach a conversation with a parent who has a fixed mindset?
That's an incredibly great question. Particularly as students, I always tell them as they go off for Thanksgiving break and the holidays, like, okay, what happens when you have to interact with Uncle so-and-so, or, a mom or dad who disagrees with you? So Justin and Bernie, what are your suggestions for how to deal with that with like family relationships?
I'm still going to lean into my previous answer of it's important to have emotional intelligence and emotional humility. So you already love your family. You love them with all your heart. Nothing can change that. And so just let them know how much you love them. Be honest. Even if you disagree with them, don't be afraid to let them know how you disagree and why you disagree with them. Just be honest and open. And I believe that they will respect that. They should respect how you feel. And regardless of how angry you may get, or how annoyed you may be, or how embarrassed you may be about their viewpoints, they're still your family. And so never forget that. I think at the end of the day, family is an institution that is God-given. It's a blessing to have family. And so cherish it and appreciate them and love on them. Even through your disagreements, it can get messy. That's what love is. Love is messy, but love is a force that can change the world. And so there's no better place to practice these concepts than in your own family. That's a great place to start.
That's a great point. Bernie, do you have anything to add?
Sure. And I think just go in, not trying to be the one to convince mom, dad, or Uncle Billy. You got to go in and say, and almost want to hear from them. Dad, why do you believe that? And just kind of hear from his perspective and mom's perspective or whoever. And then again, I think when you start that way, those type of things, and every family dynamic is different, of course, but normally, then you can kind of explain and say, all right, well, here's how I got to this conclusion, and here's why I believe this. And so when you hear because typically we speak in conclusions and we just state, our position, and that alone can be a repellent. And so I challenge everybody to ask the next question, why? So as soon as you're shell-shocked by what you heard, that may seem just beyond the pale, gather yourself and just say, okay, now why do you believe that? And you'd be shocked about what you hear. I'll share one story that actually kind of touches on the opinion versus fact thing as well. And it's, you'll never know what tidbits you can pick up and different perspectives you can garner by just speaking to someone. There was a judge here in our circuit. It was during when a lot of the cancel culture on Confederate monuments was starting, and people were just tearing down the Confederate monuments. They were being vandalized. And the prevailing thought in mainstream culture, in the media, academia, was that these were symbols of oppression, and that is clearly signs of racism that any Black person should be triggered by, and that these things were erected as a sign of white supremacy. And they talk about the years of when a lot of these things were erected in the early 20th century. They say it's not coincidental. Why would these things be erected during those times? So I spoke to this judge, and he told me he's older, and he said he would vacation in South Carolina, and his grandparents were of the age where they're old enough, they knew Confederate veterans. And so he was like, yeah, it's like, I actually knew people who fought in the Civil War. And he said what was happening in a lot of these towns is that in the early 20th century, that a lot of these veterans were starting to die, and they were getting of age. And this, despite whether you agree with their cause or not, these were their fathers, their grandfathers, and it was as a send-off. And these daughters of the Confederate States and things like that did these things to just honor them on their way out as these folks were dying. So it was a perspective I'd never even heard of before, ever part of the conversation. And he was actually there. He's like, look, I talked to grandma and grandpa, and they told me, what it was. And so a lot of these things are not always ideological bound. And so if somebody, for whatever reason, is peacefully protesting against the vandalization or takedown of a Confederate monument, it's not fair to just label these people outright as racist. There are a lot of ways people can get to a certain conclusion that you may vehemently disagree with. And I'm not asking you to change your position, but understand and ask that why. And you might get a perspective that you never knew before. And I think it will be enriching for all. And hopefully that's afforded to you as well.
I think that's great to think about these issues that we feel like are so embedded in our national dialogue as being, here's the one side, here's the other side, that there's often a lot of gray area in the middle. So I do want to thank you both so much. This has been an enlightening conversation. I hope to bring you back to the University of Delaware campus
in
soon.
person, please.
Absolutely, in person. It's been a delightful conversation. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight and for this series. It continues. Please tune into our future events. Our next event is, I'm looking at my notes here, is October 6th. Someone is saying that Justin has to bring Committed with him if you come back next. Your a cappella group.
I'll see what I can do. But it's been a privilege to be here at the University of Delaware, and Bernie and I are just grateful for the opportunity to have shared and to demonstrate our bromance despite our political frenemyship. So thank you all for having us, and we hope to see you again soon.
Bernie, final thoughts before I wrap things up?
No, thank you. This was a delight. It was an honor to be with you all. Keep doing this, keep fostering these discussions, and I think we'll be better for it as a country.
All right. Thank you both.